It was a typical Tuesday morning when Lena Carter, a seasoned journalist known for her hard-hitting investigative pieces, found herself stepping through the heavy metal doors of Atlanta's infamous Fulton County Jail. She had visited prisons before, but nothing prepared her for the gritty, chaotic energy of this facility. Overcrowded, underfunded, and infamous for its violent, unpredictable nature, the jail had become a symbol of everything wrong with the criminal justice system. But Lena wasn't here to serve time. She was here to investigate, to spend 24 hours inside the belly of the beast, documenting the harsh realities that many inmates face daily. The story she had been assigned was one she could barely believe herself. A day in the life of an inmate in Atlanta's craziest jail, as the guards escorted her through the narrow, dimly lit hallways. Lena felt an unsettling weight in the air. The walls, stained with age and neglect, seemed to close in around her. The sounds of shouting inmates echoed from distant corridors, punctuated by the occasional slamming of metal doors. It felt like something out of a horror movie, except this was no fictional set. This was real. Despite the determination in her chest, she couldn't shake the tightness in her stomach. She had done her research. The jail was notorious for its violent outbursts, its overcrowding, and its dismal conditions. But standing here, on the threshold of what would become her own personal nightmare, the reality felt far more dangerous than anything she had read in reports. Lena's pulse quickened as she was guided into a holding cell with several other women. The cell was small, with metal bars that divided them from the rest of the facility. Lena had been briefed about what to expect, but nothing could have prepared her for the overwhelming smell: urine, sweat, and something far fouler that seemed to cling to every surface. The concrete floor beneath her feet was chipped and uneven, and the low hum of fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, making it impossible to forget where she was. Her cellmate, Mandy Johnson, a woman in her early 30s with a scruffy haircut and tattoos snaking up her arms, eyed Lena suspiciously as she was ushered into the small, overcrowded space. Mandy had been in and out of jail for years, and she looked the part: tough, battle-worn, but with a steely gaze that made it clear she wasn't interested in small talk. Most of the women in the cell fell silent as Lena entered, their eyes flicking toward her, assessing her. To them, she was just another outsider. But for Lena, every one of their stares felt like a challenge. She had come here for a story, but there was a real possibility that the story might cost her more than she could handle. The intake officer, a gruff man with a patchy beard, locked the door behind them and walked off, leaving Lena with nothing but a thin mattress on the floor and a small metal sink. The other women didn't speak for a few moments, and the tension in the air was thick. Lena tried to make herself comfortable on the cot, but the cold metal pressed against her skin, making it impossible to rest. A few minutes passed, and Mandy finally spoke, her voice low and raspy. "You sure you want to be here?" she asked, her eyes scanning Lena's face. Lena was taken aback. She hadn't expected anyone to acknowledge her so quickly, let alone question her presence. "I'm just here to report," she replied carefully, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm a journalist. I'm investigating what it's really like in here." There was a moment of silence before Mandy snorted. "Good luck with that," she said, leaning back on her cot, her arms folded across her chest. "You'll see more than you bargained for, believe me." Lena didn't respond. Instead, she pulled out her notebook and began writing down observations, anything that might be useful for her article. The scribbles weren't much, but they helped her focus on the task at hand. Still, the reality of her surroundings began to settle in. The room was suffocatingly cramped, and the inmates' constant muttering and shifting created an undercurrent of anxiety that was impossible to ignore. Every now and then, she'd catch the sound of laughter, followed by the occasional shout or curse. But mostly, there was an eerie, unnatural stillness. At one point, A young woman in the corner started crying softly, her face buried in her hands. Lena didn't know her name, but she could tell by the way the other inmates avoided her that she was new to this world. The brutality of jail life often made people shut down emotionally, and it wasn't long before the crying woman fell into silence. The hours crawled by in a blur of muted sounds and oppressive heat. Lena was no stranger to uncomfortable situations, but this felt different. This wasn't an interview with a politician or a corporate executive. It was the raw, unfiltered edge of society's forgotten. She could see it in the eyes of the women around her. The resignation, the pain, the fear of never leaving Dot as night fell. The lights were dimmed, and the sounds of the jail took on a new, more menacing rhythm. Lena lay on the cot, staring at the cracked ceiling above her, her mind racing. She had come here expecting to witness the usual tales of overcrowding and violence, but what she was beginning to understand was far more unsettling. This wasn't just a broken system, it was a place where survival meant something different for every person behind bars. And that survival often came at a cost. For now, she could only wait and try to make sense of what was unfolding before her eyes. But in her gut, Lena knew this story was going to be far darker than anything she had anticipated. Chaos unfolded quickly for Lena Carter as she adjusted to the rhythm of jail life. By the time morning routines gave way to the early afternoon, she had already realized that nothing inside these walls followed predictable patterns. Every sound carried tension, every movement felt amplified, and every inmate seemed to carry a story etched into their eyes. This wasn't simply a facility where people served time, it was a place built on survival. Suspicion and the constant threat of violence at breakfast had been a bland, lukewarm scoop of grits accompanied by something that vaguely resembled fruit. The trays were pushed through the bars with no regard for sanitation or dignity. The guards moved fast, with a detached efficiency that made Lena wonder how much trauma they had numbed themselves to over the years. Around her, inmates devoured their meals quickly, as if lingering over food was a luxury no one inside the jail could afford. The hours that followed revealed the bleak routine of existence behind bars. Lena watched as inmates lined up for roll call, their footsteps echoing in the narrow hallway. The overcrowding was impossible to ignore. Cells meant for 2 women had 4, sometimes 5, packed into them. Mattresses lay on the floor like makeshift shelters, and the little space available smelled of sweat, mildew, and exhaustion. The constant noise made it difficult to think. Yells bounced off the concrete walls, toilet flushes blended with the sound of metal doors slamming. And somewhere in the distance, an alarm buzzed intermittently, as if reminding everyone that danger never slept out around midday. The fragile balance of the unit shattered. Lena found herself standing near the entrance of the common area when she first sensed something was wrong. 2 inmates, Jamila Brooks, a sharp-eyed woman built like a heavyweight fighter, and Vera Thompson, then but known for her explosive temper, began exchanging heated glares. It didn't take long for the tension to reach its boiling point. Lena noticed them arguing in low voices, leaning in so close their foreheads nearly touched. Then suddenly, their hands flew up and fists began to swing. The fight erupted like a spark in a dry forest. Jamila pushed Vera into a table, causing it to crash to the ground. The sound ricocheted through the room, triggering a wave of commotion. Trays clattered, inmates scrambled away, and a few women shouted warnings. Someone attempted to intervene but was shoved aside. In a matter of seconds, the 2 women were rolling on the floor, pulling hair, kicking, clawing, desperate and enraged. 3 guards stormed in with batons raised, shouting commands that were swallowed by the noise. Lena watched in shock as the officers separated the women with brute force. Jamila was dragged to her feet, blood trickling from her lip. Vera was pinned down, her arms twisted behind her back. The guards cuffed them both before hauling them away, and the unit slowly fell back into a tense, uneasy stillness. What unsettled Lena wasn't the fight itself, it was the reaction of the other inmates. Many looked unfazed, even bored. A few exchanged quick glances as if silently confirming bets. Violence wasn't a surprise here. It was an expectation. It was simply part of the rhythm of the day. When Lena returned to her cell, Mandy Johnson sat on her cot, scribbling in a worn notebook. She glanced up briefly, then looked away, as if the scene earlier hadn't concerned her at all. Her calmness fascinated Lena. The other inmates seemed to navigate this hostile environment with an instinct that she could not fully grasp as the afternoon dragged on. Lena felt the emotional weight of the environment pressing on her. She walked carefully, observing the unspoken rules. Don't stare too long. Don't ask too many questions. Don't appear weak. She realized that physical danger was only one part of the struggle. The psychological toll of being constantly alert, constantly bracing for potential conflict, seeped into her bones. The fear was subtle but ever-present, like a constant hum beneath every thought dot in the medical bay line. She overheard two women whisper about an inmate who'd been taken to solitary earlier for causing trouble. No one explained what trouble meant, and no one asked. Conversations in jail were cryptic by necessity secrets kept people alive. Later, a guard escorted Lena and several others to a recreation area, a bleak courtyard surrounded by towering fences topped with razor wire. The sky felt distant, almost unreachable. A few women walked in circles, some huddled together smoking, others pacing alone. Lena felt the cracked pavement beneath her shoes and tried to draw in a deep breath. But even the fresh air tasted metallic as she observed the courtyard. She couldn't help noticing the quiet glances exchanged among the inmates. Something simmered beneath the surface: unspoken alliances, hidden grudges, silent warnings. She realized that the fight she had witnessed was only a small fragment of a much larger pattern. Survival here wasn't about strength alone. It was about understanding the hidden currents that flowed through every conversation, every look, every movement. And as the sun began to dip behind the fence, casting long, eerie shadows across the courtyard, Lena understood that she had only scratched the surface of the brutality inside these walls. The hours inside Fulton County Jail were starting to blur together. Lena had lost track of time, and each minute seemed to stretch endlessly into the next. By now, she had come to accept that the routine of this place wasn't just about dealing with the obvious overcrowding, lack of sanitation, and violence. No, there were darker currents beneath the surface, currents she hadn't quite understood yet. She felt it in the way the inmates moved, the things they didn't say, the things they couldn't say. One evening, as the jail's artificial lights flickered on and the shift change began, Lena noticed something unsettling. Kayla Williams, a woman who had kept to herself since she'd been placed in Lena's cell, was acting strangely. At first, Lena hadn't thought much of it. Kayla was a little off, sure, but most of the women inside had their quirks. However, over the past few hours, Kayla's behavior had become more erratic. She paced the small cell in tight circles, muttering to herself in a voice barely audible, her eyes darting nervously from side to side. At first, Lena assumed she was just another inmate struggling with the harshness of life inside. But something in Kayla's movements seemed different. There was a palpable urgency in the way she walked, like she was expecting something or someone to arrive at any moment. Around midnight, when the noise in the hallways died down and the cell block settled into its eerie nighttime silence, Lena caught a glimpse of Kayla slipping something from beneath her cot. The woman's hands shook as she carefully unfolded a piece of paper, the edges frayed and worn. Lena could barely make out the letters, but there was something familiar about the way Kayla held it, like she was hiding something dangerous. Lena leaned in, pretending to be asleep on her cot, but her mind was racing. Kayla glanced around the cell, making sure no one was watching, then quickly folded the paper back up and slipped it into her pocket. It was enough to raise Lena's suspicions. Whatever was on that paper, Kayla didn't want anyone to see it. The rest of the night passed in a haze of noise and sleeplessness, but Lena couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. She spent the next few hours replaying everything she had seen in her head. Kayla had been acting strange ever since she'd arrived at the jail, but now it was clear that there was something more going on, something she wasn't letting on. But what was it? By the morning, Lena decided to confront Mandy, who had been in and out of the system for years and knew the ins and outs of jail life. Maybe she could shed some light on what was happening with Kayla. Mandy, who was sitting cross-legged on her cot, flipped through a small book, barely acknowledging Lena as she approached. "I noticed something strange last night," Lena said cautiously. "Kayla, she's hiding something." Mandy raised an eyebrow but didn't respond right away. She had heard the stories of women with strange habits, but Kayla was different. Unlike most of the inmates in this place, she kept to herself, barely engaging with the others. Still, Mandy knew enough to avoid sticking her nose too deep into things that didn't concern her. "What are you talking about?" Mandy asked, her voice flat. "She was acting paranoid last night," Lena explained. "I saw her slip something, some kind of paper, under her cot. It wasn't just a letter. She's hiding something." Mandy put her book down and sat up straight, giving Lena a long, appraising look. "Listen, you don't want to go poking around with people like Kayla," she said finally. "She's not like the rest of us. She's connected. She's got people on the outside, people who'll make sure she's protected in here." Lena frowned, trying to digest what Mandy had said. Protected from what? Mandy's eyes narrowed as if the question was dangerous. "You're asking questions you don't want to know the answers to? Trust me, there's more going on in here than just fights and overcrowding. People make deals. They work with the guards, with the system. You don't want to get caught up in it." But Lena wasn't backing down. Her journalistic instincts told her that whatever was happening with Kayla, it wasn't just a personal issue. There was something bigger at play, something that tied together the violence, the fear, and the constant sense of danger in the jail. If she could piece it together, maybe she could uncover a deeper corruption, one that stretched far beyond the inmates. The day dragged on, but Lena couldn't stop thinking about the folded paper. Her curiosity grew, and so did the sense that there was something much darker happening here, just beneath the surface. Kayla wasn't the only one hiding something. As Lena moved through the day, she noticed that the inmates were all more tense than usual. The usual fights and outbursts had been replaced by quiet conversations, furtive glances, and the feeling that something was coming. Something inevitable. It wasn't until Kayla came back to the cell later that night that Lena got another glimpse of what was going on. Kayla was no longer pacing or muttering to herself. Instead, she sat in the corner, whispering to Vera and a few others in the cell. They were talking in low voices, passing something between them. It was clear they were plotting something, but what? Lena had a sinking feeling that Kayla's secret wasn't just a personal matter. It was a key to a much larger, more dangerous story. And it was a story she couldn't ignore. The next day, the atmosphere inside the jail felt even heavier, charged with a sense of dread that Lena couldn't shake. She had been in the facility for almost 48 hours now, and it seemed as if the tension had only built. The usual sounds of inmate chatter, doors slamming, and the occasional fight were still present, but there was something else now, an undercurrent of secrecy that hung in the air like smoke. It was as though everyone here was keeping something hidden, something unsaid. And Lena was beginning to feel the weight of it pressing on her dot. It wasn't long before she became more aware of the guards. specifically Officer Carlos Martinez, a man with a dark, brooding presence that made her uncomfortable the moment he walked into the room. Officer Martinez wasn't like the other guards who had a practiced indifference, like they had given up on caring about the inmates a long time ago. No, Martinez had a dangerous intensity about him, his eyes always scanning, always calculating. When he looked at an inmate, it wasn't with the dispassionate gaze of someone who had seen it all. It was sharper, as though he saw something more, something useful. Lena had seen him walking the halls several times. But it was only that afternoon that she began to realize how deeply involved he was in the dynamics of this place. It wasn't just his role as a guard that made him stand out, it was the way other inmates reacted to him. Some looked away quickly when his gaze landed on them. Others muttered something under their breath, words she couldn't quite make out. But the tone was unmistakable. Fear, disgust. That afternoon, Lena found herself watching Martinez as he moved between cells. His presence was commanding, and he had the unsettling habit of lingering just a little too long in the hallways, his eyes scanning the faces of the inmates as if he were searching for something or someone. He walked past her cell twice in the span of half an hour, and each time his gaze flicked over her. There was no warmth in his eyes, only cold calculation. The kind of look that made Lena want to shrink back, but she couldn't afford to. She had a job to do. She couldn't let him intimidate her, not yet. As the day wore on, Lena heard whispers about Martinez, nothing concrete, just rumors and half-truths, but they were enough to stir something inside her. Some inmates claimed that he was more than just a guard. He had been involved in shady deals with certain inmates, making arrangements that kept some out of solitary confinement or reduced their sentences. Other stories were more troubling. There were murmurs of threats, of favors exchanged behind closed doors. But the details were always vague, and no one would speak directly about what was really going on. That evening, Lena witnessed something that confirmed her growing suspicions. She had been sitting near the common area when she noticed Martinez cornering Jamila Brooks in one of the hallways. Jamila, the tough, no-nonsense woman who had been part of the earlier fight, stood her ground. But there was a nervousness to her posture now, something in the way she held herself that made Lena think the conversation wasn't just about anything trivial. Jamila seemed to be listening intently, her body language tense, as though whatever Martinez was saying mattered in ways that went beyond the usual jailhouse banter. Lena couldn't hear the words, but she could see enough to understand the dynamics. Martinez was leaning in, his expression cold and hard, while Jamila's face was unreadable, her eyes flicking nervously around the hall. There was no confrontation, no shouting, just an exchange that felt more like a business transaction than a conversation. When it ended, Jamila walked away quickly, glancing over her shoulder toward Lena, but her eyes told nothing. She wasn't shaken, just careful. After Jamila disappeared into her cell, Lena felt a chill run through her. She had seen enough to know that something wasn't right, but she couldn't yet put her finger on it. The way Martinez had spoken to Jamila, it wasn't just a routine exchange. There was something personal there, something darker. Lena knew she had to find out more, but the stakes were higher now. If Martinez was involved in anything illegal, it was only a matter of time before those secrets started to unravel. And the last thing she wanted was to get caught in the crossfire. When she returned to her cell, Mandy was waiting for her. There was a shift in her demeanor, a sense of quiet urgency in the way she spoke. "I saw what happened," Mandy said in a low voice, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "Martinez, he's not what you think he is. He's not just a guard. He's part of something bigger." Lena felt a jolt of realization, but she kept her voice steady. "What do you mean? What is he doing here?" Mandy shook her head slowly. "He's connected to the people on the outside. He has favors to call in, and he makes sure things go his way. Trust me, you don't want to get on his bad side. You don't want to get involved in whatever it is he's running here. Lena's mind raced as Mandy spoke, each word feeding into the growing sense of dread she had been feeling all day. If Martinez was running something behind the scenes, it wasn't just about corruption within the walls of the jail. There was a much larger operation at play, one that might stretch far beyond the confines of this facility. And if Lena was going to get to the bottom of it, she had to be very careful. She had no idea just how deep this rabbit hole went, but something told her that finding the truth might be more dangerous than she had ever anticipated. The final hours in Fulton County Jail felt like an eternity to Lena. She had originally planned to stick to her investigation, observe, report, and leave, but as the day wore on, everything became more complicated. What she thought was a straightforward assignment had transformed into something far darker, more treacherous than she ever anticipated. The pieces of the puzzle were scattered, and yet there was no way to put them all together without risking her own safety. It was clear that something was brewing inside these walls, something far more dangerous than overcrowding or prison fights taught as the clock ticked toward her departure. Lena couldn't shake the feeling that her time here wasn't just a journalistic exercise. It was a warning, and she wasn't the only one who felt the tension building. The final confrontation came when Kayla Williams approached Lena late that afternoon, just as she was preparing for what she thought would be her exit from the madness. The air inside the cell block was thick with the usual noise, the shouting, the slamming of doors, but for some reason, Kayla's arrival brought an eerie stillness. The woman who had been so quiet, so evasive, was now standing in front of Lena, a small, folded piece of paper in her hands. Her eyes darted nervously from side to side, and for the first time since Lena had met her, there was a look of fear in her expression. It was a look that made Lena's heart race. "I know what you're doing," Kayla whispered, her voice shaking. "You think you're going to leave here with some grand story, but you don't know what you're getting into." Lena froze, her breath caught in her throat. This was the moment she had been waiting for, the key to understanding what was really going on inside this hellhole. She tried to stay calm, forcing herself to speak slowly. "I'm just trying to report what's happening here. I'm not involved in anything." Kayla's laugh was dark, bitter. "You're already involved, Lena. Don't you get it? You've been asking the wrong questions. You've seen the way things work here, the way the guards turn a blind eye, how the inmates run their own businesses, their own deals. You think it's just about surviving? It's about control, about power. And if you think you're just a reporter, you're wrong. They'll come for you if you dig too deep." Lena's pulse quickened. "Who are you talking about? Who's in charge here?" Kayla stepped closer, lowering her voice even more. "The guards, yes. But they're just puppets. It's the ones outside, the ones who own this place. They've got the system in their pockets, police, politicians, even the media. Carlos Martinez, he's just one of them. He's part of something bigger, something they don't want you to know about." The weight of Kayla's words hit Lena like a sledgehammer. She had suspected something, but hearing it confirmed sent a chill down her spine. The idea that there was an operation running through the entire system, corrupt officials, connections to criminal organizations, and those pulling the strings from the outside was overwhelming. And now Lena had a front row seat to it. But the truth was dangerous. And with every passing hour, she realized just how little she knew about the forces at play. Kayla handed her the folded piece of paper, the one she had been hiding. Lena hesitated but took it. Unfolding it slowly, she saw the name and address scrawled across it, a street just outside the jail, a place that wasn't on any map Lena had been given. It was an address that made her stomach drop. It wasn't just a random location. It was a place tied to the operations running behind the scenes of the jail. The place where the money was flowing, where the deals were made. Get out while you can. Kayla whispered, her face now pale with fear. Don't come back here. You've seen enough. Before Lena could respond, Kayla turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows of the cell block, leaving Lena standing there, the weight of the revelation pressing down on her chest. Her mind raced. What was the address? Who would be waiting for her there? And what did Kayla mean by "don't come back here"? She spent the next few hours grappling with what she had learned. Carlos Martinez, the guard she had suspected, was just the tip of the iceberg. Whatever game was being played in this jail was tied to far more powerful players on the outside. Kayla had given her a clue, a map that led to a larger conspiracy. But the question was, could she trust her? Was Kayla just another player in the game, or was she genuinely trying to warn her? As the night fell and Lena prepared for her exit, she felt a new sense of urgency. She had learned enough in the past, 24 hours, to understand that this place wasn't just a holding pen for the poor and the forgotten. It was a hub for corruption and crime, with threads that reached far beyond the jail's walls. But the more she learned, the more she realized she was at risk. The system had its eyes on her now. She wasn't just a reporter anymore. She was part of something dangerous, something bigger than she had ever imagined. And when the doors finally opened, she stepped out. But it wasn't into freedom, it was into a world that was now watching her. And she wasn't sure how long her protection would last. The moment she stepped into the car, that would take her back to her hotel. Lena glanced back at the looming walls of the jail. She had entered as an outsider, but now she was entangled in something far darker than she had ever expected. What would she do with the information she had? Would she go public, risk it all for the truth? Or would the price of the story be too high? As the car sped away, Lena couldn't help but feel that the real story was just beginning. And it wasn't over yet.